The year is 2011. The Arab Spring uprisings are sweeping across North Africa and the Middle East. Inspired by these events, protests erupt in Syria against the authoritarian rule of President Bashar al-Assad. What began as peaceful demonstrations quickly escalated into a brutal crackdown by the Syrian government. As security forces responded with deadly force, the situation spiraled into armed rebellion. The country descended into a full-blown civil war, pitting the Assad regime against a fragmented opposition. Families were torn apart, cities were reduced to rubble, and millions were displaced from their homes. The Syrian civil war became a magnet for foreign intervention, transforming the country into a battleground for competing geopolitical interests. To understand the roots of the Syrian civil war, one must look beyond the immediate triggers of the Arab Spring. Decades of authoritarian rule under the Assad dynasty had created a system rife with corruption and inequality. Unemployment was rampant, particularly among the youth, leaving many feeling hopeless and disillusioned. Basic freedoms were suppressed, and dissent was met with swift and brutal repression. The Syrian people, inspired by the uprisings in Tunisia, Egypt, and Libya, dared to hope for a different future, but their hopes for a peaceful transition were quickly dashed as the Assad regime responded to calls for reform with violence and oppression. The initial protests were a reflection of the universal human desire for dignity, freedom, and opportunity. As the Syrian civil war raged on, it became a magnet for various groups and militias, each vying for control and influence. The conflict drew in a myriad of factions, each with its own agenda backing from different international players. This created a highly complex and volatile situation on the ground. The Free Syrian Army, initially composed of defectors from the Syrian armed forces, emerged as the main opposition group. They sought to overthrow the Assad regime and establish a new government. However, their efforts were hampered by a lack of unified command and insufficient resources. However, it suffered from internal divisions and lack of resources. These internal conflicts weakened their position and made it difficult to present a united front against the Assad regime. The fragmented nature of the opposition allowed other groups to gain influence and control. Kurdish groups in northern Syria saw an opportunity to assert their autonomy, forming their own militias and carving out self-governing enclaves. They aimed to protect their communities and establish a degree of independence amidst the chaos. Their efforts were met with both support and opposition from various quarters. The emergence of ISIS added a terrifying new dimension to the war, exploiting the chaos to seize large swaths of territory. Their brutal tactics and extremist ideology shocked the world and brought a new level of violence to the conflict. ISIS's rise further complicated the already intricate web of alliances and enmities. The group's brutality and extremist ideology sent shockwaves through the region and beyond, drawing international condemnation and prompting military intervention, ultimately destroying the group. The campaign included not only airstrikes but also special operations forces on the ground, intelligence sharing, and support for local forces. Beyond combating terrorism, the U.S. also provided limited support to select rebel groups fighting against the Assad government. This support was part of a broader strategy to promote a political solution to the conflict, though it was often criticized for being insufficient and inconsistent. The U.S.'s stated goals in Syria were to defeat ISIS, promote a political transition away from Assad, and alleviate the humanitarian crisis. Humanitarian aid was a crucial component of the U.S. strategy, aimed at providing relief to millions of displaced Syrians and stabilizing the region. However, its reluctance to commit significant ground troops or provide more robust support to the rebels limited its ability to shape the course of the war. This cautious approach reflected broader concerns about becoming entangled in another prolonged conflict in the Middle East, similar to Iraq and Afghanistan. Section 5. The Russian Bear enters the fray. Preserving influence and countering the West, Russia, a long-standing ally of Syria, launched a military intervention in support of Assad in 2015. Russian airstrikes targeted both ISIS positions and rebel groups opposing the Syrian government, significantly bolstering Assad's forces. Russia sought to preserve its strategic interests in the region, including its only Mediterranean naval base in Tartus. Intervention also provided an opportunity for Russia to project power on the world stage, countering Western influence in the Middle East. The Russian intervention had a profound impact on the Syrian conflict, shifting the balance of power and significantly strengthening the Assad regime. It also set the stage for a dangerous proxy war between Russia and the United States, each backing opposite sides in the conflict. Section 6. A proxy battlefield. Indirect confrontation and humanitarian fallout. The Syrian civil war became a tragic example of a proxy war, with the United States and Russia supporting opposing sides. Both sides provided their allies with weapons, training, and logistical support, turning Syria into a testing ground for their latest military hardware and tactics. This indirect confrontation played out in the skies over Syria, with Russian and US-led coalition aircraft operating in close proximity. To mitigate the risk of escalation, both sides established deconfliction mechanisms, including communication channels to avoid misunderstandings. The Syrian people were caught in the crossfire, their country ravaged by years of relentless bombardment, their lives upended by displacement. The conflict created one of the world's worst humanitarian crises, with millions displaced internally and across borders. Section 7. The Path Forward. Navigating a Fragmented Present Towards an Uncertain Future. As of December 2024, the Syrian civil war has entered its 14th year, a grim testament to the intractability of the conflict. The war has left a trail of devastation, with cities reduced to rubble and millions of lives disrupted. The humanitarian crisis continues to be severe, with countless families displaced and in dire need of aid. While the intensity of fighting has decreased, Syria remains a fragmented country, with different factions controlling various parts of its territory. This fragmentation has led to a complex and unstable political landscape, where local governance varies widely and the rule of law is often tenuous. The Assad regime, bolstered by Russian and Iranian support, has regained control over much of the country but faces a multitude of challenges. These include rebuilding infrastructure, restoring public services, and addressing the grievances of a war-weary population. The presence of foreign military forces further complicates the situation. The U.S., while maintaining a limited military presence in the northeast, has largely shifted its focus to containing the remnants of ISIS and countering Iranian influence. This strategic pivot reflects broader geopolitical interests and the complexities of international alliances in the region. Relations between the U.S. and Russia in Syria remain tense, marked by a mix of pragmatic cooperation on deconfliction and deep mistrust. Both powers have vested interests in the region, leading to a delicate balance of power that requires constant negotiation and vigilance. Achieving lasting peace in Syria will require a multifaceted approach, including sustained diplomatic efforts, accountability for war crimes, and a commitment to addressing the root causes of the conflict. The international community must work together to support reconstruction, promote reconciliation, and ensure that the voices of all Syrians are heard in the peace process.